Senator Timal and his wife, MP Rushton Parry and his wife, Professor Brinsley Samuel, Dr. Mahes, and Nadira Khan. Specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, good afternoon. It is an honor and a pleasure for me to be here this afternoon. When Dr. Mahes invited me to bring greetings and do what she described as a keynote speech, I was totally thrilled because special needs and persons and their families is one of my great passions. And it's interesting that this is being done today, the launch of this book, Autism in Trinidad and Tobago, because it is being done one day after what is probably the most important case in the education system in the United States of America, which is a case called Brown and the Board of Education, which is a landmark Education Act and the Civil Rights case, which was a decision in the US Supreme Court in which the court ruled that American state laws which established racial segregation in public schools were unconstitutional, and even if the segregated schools are otherwise equal in quality. It was handed down on May 17, 1954. The court's unanimous 9-0 decision stated that separate education facilities are inherently unequal and therefore violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution. The decision's 14 pages did not spell out any sort of method for ending racial segregation in schools, and the court's second decision of Brown 2, 349 US 294 in 1955, only ordered some states to desegregate with what was described as deliberate speed. And this was 65 years ago. And if you, I'm going through this process of explaining how landmark that was, because I firmly believe that it is only until the laws are changed in Trinidad and Tobago that children with special needs and their family, people with special needs in the family, will have the equal protection of the law for the facilities and the interventions that they need. It is quite well known that I recently raised a private member's motion in Parliament asking that the government revise the laws related to special needs children and their families to provide the kind of support services that they need. The Honourable Minister of Education, who I understand was supposed to be here, he had some car problems today. Responded in characteristic political form, although I made it a point of stating very clearly that the motion was not intended to diminish the work of the minister or the ministry or any of the past ministers, because I don't think that kind of confrontational approach is productive. I think it was aimed at providing an empirical and historical platform to describe what happened in the US and the UK, where we are in Trinidad and Tobago today, and the kinds of trials and tribulations that children with special needs, adults with special needs and their families go through just trying to get services. The Student Support Services is a division of the Ministry of Education, and to be very honest, it's doing its best. But when parents have to go back to the ministry every year to bring evidence that their child still has Down syndrome or autism, you know how far we have to go. And there are parents who have to do that. And they have to do that to get $2,500 TT dollars. And if anyone knows of the cost of remediating, diagnosing and remediating on a continuous level a child with special needs, or any of the 13 categories of special needs, you will realize how inadequate $2,500 is. It's really insulting. It's actually ironic that our national anthem, which we just heard brilliantly played by the young man, give him a round of applause again, please, states clearly, every creed and every race finds an equal place. Every creed and every race should find an equal place. And may God bless our nation. But is that really happening? No, it's not. It's not, because what we're doing, and as I said before, I've learned in my short stint in politics and looking on over many years that the confrontational approach, it doesn't seem to work for me. I think collaborative approaches and consultative approaches are the way to go, and bringing groups together to find solutions that are sustainable is the way to go. When we don't come together and we really establish a system like student support services, it's a kind of handout. It's a lie, as we see in Trinidad and Tobago. Because in the US, because of many different laws, starting with that famous Brown versus the Board of Education, which it is an education law, but it really speaks to equal rights, because it was based on the premise that black children should have the right to go to school with white children. And it wasn't really deeply philosophically about race. It was because the schools that the white children attended had more resources and provided better education for the children. So black parents wanted their children to have that kind of access, equal access to the best education. And that's why it's such a landmark case for equal rights in the US. And that's why it spawned laws like the Americans with Disability Act in 1990, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act in 1975, the Individuals with Education Act 1990 also, and also groundbreaking, the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001, which was amended in 2007, and then again in 2010. And these laws provide a legal framework for parents and caregivers of children with autism or any of the 13 special needs category to take schools to court to demand the kind of education for their children, which is the right of every child. It is a right, it is not a blind or a favor the state is doing you. A child with special needs has no less rights than what is described as typical children in education. And that, to me, therein lies the foundation of the problem. That we think that the student support services is a favor we're doing, and that we have special schools, but we have a national philosophy of what is described as inclusive education. And inclusive education in the special needs fraternity is education where all children have access to education in what is described as the general education setting, as far as possible. Because all children gain from this, they are socialized, because if you segregate children with special needs into special schools, they still have to come out and live in a world with everybody else. So it's not socializing them for productive lives. So as far as possible, in the 13 categories, there's some that are particularly difficult to house in general education classrooms, but as far as possible, of the 13 categories, which include children with Down syndrome, autism, spinal bifida, hearing impaired, visually impaired, with physical disabilities. As far as possible, accommodations are made, or should be made, in the general education classroom, so that these children are diagnosed and housed. And the interesting thing about it is that one of the categories is specifically learning disability, which more than 15% of our children in Trinidad and Tobago have. It may not be as visible as some of the other special needs categories, but when we find these children are diagnosed, they perform poorly in schools, and they end up vulnerable to gangs and truancy and other antisocial activities. So we really have to come together, because that's, to me, while I commend all the special needs groups, because groups and NGOs such as Dr. Mahiz has found in Autism Place and the Down Syndrome Family Network, which I work with regularly, and other groups are doing amazing work. But there are 13 special needs categories, and in each category there are 4 or 5 groups. And I know my colleagues in Parliament who are here today will know that no government or no state can negotiate with 25, 30 groups. So the special needs groups also have a responsibility to come together and advocate for changes in the law. Because when you go to a government, and I'm not talking about PNM or UNC or anything, I'm talking about any government in power, and try to advocate as separate groups, you will never have the kind of potency or effect as if you come together and advocate on behalf of all the special needs categories in Trinidad and Tobago. I think that is the next challenge facing caregivers, parents, and families with special needs, to come together in a unified front to advocate for large legislative change. The law has to change. Parents need to have the laws behind them to be able to go and say, listen, my child, I think there's a problem with my child, there's professional diagnosis, there is what is called an individual education plan, specifically designed for that child. There's monitoring and evaluation of progress, and the child gets the kind of intervention that is paid for by the state. Because education gets the biggest part of the pie in the budget, no matter who's in power. It either runs first or second to national security, as we all know, for the last 20 years. $9 billion. And if you disaggregate out of that $9 billion, what is eventually allocated to children with special needs and their families, it is less than 3%. How is that fair? That is not fair. But we're talking about we're educating at the tertiary level, and we have early childhood universal care. It must be equitably spread. It must be given to those most in need, the vulnerable groups. There's a situation, I'll never forget it. A gentleman at one of the Down Syndrome Family Network conferences stood up and literally cried because he has 2 children with special needs. One is autistic and one child was diagnosed with Down syndrome. And he and his wife literally have to move mountains every month to provide equally, because they have 4 children, equally for their 4 children, particularly those with the special needs. And he stood up, I'll never forget it, and he cried because the education ministry was presently was begging them, can we do more? He doesn't want to go on fancy vacations. He doesn't want a fancy car. He wants what any parent wants for their child. What every parent wants for their child. He just has more challenges, so he needs more support. And the state should pay for that support. And we have to come to the point where we as a country protect the vulnerable by laws, so they have legal redress, so these parents can go to court and say, my child deserves this. That is where we have to end. That is where the battle must be. But as I said before, the special needs groups need to come together and provide and present a united front. And let all the families, because if it's one thing politicians understand, or 2 things politicians understand, embarrassments and vote. Embarrassment and vote. If all the special needs categories got up one day, all 13, and parents of children in all categories came together and stood in front of that Parliament building, you see how fast it'll change. But it can't be one group or 1.5 groups. It has to be everyone in 1,000. And if people realize how large this group is and the kind of impact legislative change will have on ordinary citizens who have a right. The Education Act of Trinidad and Tobago 1975 states that every child has the right to education. The education that helps that child realize its fullest potential. And special needs laws also accommodate for those that are described as gifted children. Because gifted children who are bright in math or bright in Spanish or bright in sports also need special support so that that child reaches his or her full potential. So it's not only about children who are differently able. It's about providing the kind of education system in this country so that all children reach their full potential. I'd like to end by, I've got a chance, thank you, Dr. Mahis, for giving me an advanced copy of the book, and I'm looking through quickly. There are 2 parts that really, really resonated with me that I'd like to just read from as I close. And the first one is on page 57, and it's called, and it's just really relevant. I'm going to use this in Parliament, so I'm asking for your copyright permission. Superheroes disguised as parents. And I thought that was exactly what this is about. Superheroes disguised as parents. And I quote, Jason is a single parent. The younger of his 2 daughters was diagnosed with autism at age 3, only a few months before her mother left. Since then, Jason has sole responsibility for his daughters. Initially, he managed quite well, get a good job that allowed him to hire a babysitter who took care of the girls. Things got bad when his non-verbal daughter started experiencing a series of developmental issues. The babysitter left the job claiming she couldn't care for a dumb child. There's a state official who stood in Parliament recently and used that word, dumb. It is an inappropriate word for anyone to be using, but a state official, whom I shall not call, stood up in Parliament recently and said dumb. Who should know better? Continuing, Jason was laid off from work. Since his daughter's diagnosis, he'd been fired from 4 jobs, either for irregular attendance, a lack of punctuality, or low performance. His daughter has been moved from one daycare to the next as he struggled to find someone who could understand his special needs. Life has been tough for him as a single parent. Life has also been challenging for Carl and Marissa, parents to 10-year-old Nikki. Nikki was diagnosed with autism and other medical complications 6 years ago. Since the family lives in a rural area with no special schools nearby, Marissa was forced to take part-time jobs so she could stay at home to care for Nikki. Although both Carl and Marissa are income earners, they have a supportive extended family. Nikki's high medical and therapy bills mean that they're struggling financially. This has impacted negatively on their marriage. And like many other parents of children with special needs, they struggle to cope mentally and emotionally. Being a good parent to any child is a difficult task. The thing is, when you have a, in parentheses, normal child, you can cater to that child's needs, access opportunities available to you, and have the hope that your child will grow up to be an independent individual with a job, etc. With a special needs child, it is a whole different scenario. Parents must become advocates in order to provide the best basic needs, such as medical care, education, and therapy for their children. The deeper turmoil is not knowing what kind of future your child will have, worrying about whether your child will ever be able to take care of himself or herself, and if not, who will take care of your child when you're gone. It's an intense test of inner strength to deal with the physical and mental exhaustion feelings of being isolated. Parents are required to have superhuman powers to cope in a society with simple, unaccommodating towards those with special needs. But surely the situation doesn't have to be this challenging. Accommodation and support can go a long way in changing it. Support from the highest to the lowest levels of society is desperately needed. At the national level, policies and structures to accommodate those with special needs will certainly help. A government sensitive to those with special needs, the provision of services in the public sector, and public servants who are empathetic will help parents to cope. Parents need to know there are proper activities for their children. They can drop their children off at the school and that the child is safe. That someone qualified and empathetic is taking care of that child, and the child has access to a fun learning and safe environment. They need a system working with them, not frustrating them. It's just part of that, and I'll just read part of the other one. And it's what every parent wants you to know about their child with autism. And I'll just read the headers. My child has feelings. I know what's best for my child. Don't compare my child with other children. A label does not define my child. Bad behavior is not always bad behavior. My child deserves a space in society. My child is very much like other children. Sometimes my family just needs a little bit of understanding. That's from a parent of a child with autism. So you see, parents of children with autism are like any other parent. They want the best for their children. They want to see their children grow up to be happy, healthy, productive members of society. They just need more support, and the state should provide that support. One of the recent national events, as I close, that really shows how far we have to come as a society and how insensitive we can be, is the issue of the recent helicopter crash. And TV6, I guess they thought they were doing a great thing. Inexperienced, ill-advised reporter taking a witness statement, and there's nothing wrong with the principle of it, from someone who has challenges, who was using an informal approach to sign language. And the kind of derision and insults and insensitivity I saw online about that really saddened me. And it's because, one, the media house didn't understand that you have to treat those situations in a more sensitive manner. And you expose the gentleman to public ridicule because of how poorly you handled it. Not that it was inappropriate to have him tell the story, because he was an eyewitness. Like any other eyewitness, he could tell the story, but in his way. So if you had somebody speaking Spanish, wouldn't you have a translator? Wouldn't it make sense to have a translator? Or if the eyewitness spoke French as his native language, wouldn't the media house have had a translator? But the person had an informal sign language mode, and they just put the person on the screen doing the sign language with no translation. Who's at fault? Is it the person or the media house? It's just an example of how insensitive we can be, and this is one of the top media houses in the country, to persons with disabilities. And we have to do better than that. We have to. All he needed was the support of a translator. Thank you very much.